The Sea Peoples, a cataclysm in the ancient Mediterranean. Over 3,000 years ago, a relentless storm swept across the Mediterranean, leaving destruction in its wake. Prosperous cities burned to ash. Kingdoms once hubs of trade and culture vanished as if they never existed. In the few surviving records, a haunting phrase echoes, "invaders from the sea." Who were they? Ancient sources call them the Sea People's enigmatic warriors, sailing unfamiliar ships, wielding strange weapons, and speaking unknown tongues. Their origins remain a mystery, yet their arrival shook the foundations of the ancient world. Even today, we know little about them. Their homeland is obscure, their motives unclear, their identity seemingly erased from history. All we have are accounts from the civilizations that faced them, societies that endured the terror they unleashed. Were they desperate migrants fleeing collapsing homelands, ruthless raiders, or an organized force bent on toppling the established order? After 3,000 years, the questions linger. Archaeologists scour scattered clues. Historians debate endlessly. Somewhere beneath the sands of time, the truth about one of history's greatest mysteries may still lie hidden. This is the story of the Sea Peoples and the era they plunged into darkness. A thriving but fragile world. To grasp why the Sea Peoples' emergence was so cataclysmic, we must envision the Mediterranean before the crisis, a connected, prosperous, yet fragile world. From the 14th to early 13th century BCE, the Mediterranean and Near East flourished like never before. Civilizations thrived economically and technologically linked by an intricate web of trade and diplomacy. In the south, Egypt's new kingdom under pharaohs like Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Seti II reached its zenith. Grand temples rose along the Nile, testifying to the pharaoh's wealth and ambition. Egyptian ships sailed to distant ports, returning with cedar from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, and gems from the mythical land of Punt. In the north, the Hittite Empire dominated Anatolia from their fortified capital, Hattusa. They controlled vital trade routes linking the Near East to the Balkans, excelling as warriors and diplomats. Their archives reveal a sophisticated world of commerce and negotiation. In the West, the Mycenaean civilization ruled mainland Greece from strongholds like Mycenae Tiryns and Pylos. Known for advanced metallurgy and elite palaces, Mycenaean ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, trading wine, olive oil, pottery, and weapons. In the East, Levantine port cities like Ugarit, Byblos, and Sidon were crucial trade hubs. Ugarit, a vibrant commercial and cultural center, birthed one of the world's first alphabets, a precursor to modern scripts. Further south, Canaan, later home to new peoples, was a fertile region under the influence of great empires actively engaged in coastal trade. What bound these centers was not just military might or wealth, but a complex trade network spanning sea routes and overland caravans. Ships carried essential materials, especially copper and tin, to forge bronze. Archaeological finds like the Uluburun shipwreck off modern Turkey reveal cargoes of treasures from across the ancient world, underscoring this economic integration. Yet this interdependence was a fatal flaw. Disrupting trade routes could trigger a domino effect. Moreover, many civilizations, despite their outward strength, relied on centralized brittle power structures, making them vulnerable to sudden shocks. Few could foresee that within decades, a mysterious force from the sea would unravel this order, triggering one of history's greatest collapses. Mott. The web of trade. At the heart of this prosperous world was a vast, intricate trade network, a system every civilization depended on a fragile thread tying their fates together. Picture a ship departing Ugarit on a calm day, laden with copper ingots from Cyprus, the era's richest copper source, alongside rare tin, possibly from Anatolia, the Caucasus, or even the distant British Isles via perilous trade routes. Copper and tin formed bronze, the essential alloy for weapons armor tools and ornate jewelry. Without bronze empires, armies and economies faltered. The ship also carried cedar from Lebanon's mountains for warships' palaces, and elite coffins gold from Nubia, gems from Sinai, frankincense from Arabia, and purple dye from murex shells coveted by Eastern courts. Such ships linked Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, Greece, and the Aegean Islands. In Hattusa, Hittites imported horses and tin, exporting early iron goods and fine textiles. Mycenae's royal tombs yield artifacts from Cyprus, Egypt, and the Near East evidence of a vibrant trade world. Each merchant, each ship, was a small link in this vast network, carrying not just goods, but ideas, technologies, religions, and languages. Ugarit's proto-alphabet, advanced metallurgy, and ancient myths traveled these trade routes. Yet this deep reliance made civilizations vulnerable. When tin supplies were cut off, or piracy and war disrupted trade, the consequences were catastrophic, threatening entire economic systems. The Bronze Age Foundation. The unique role of the Bronze Age underpinned this thriving world. Why bronze, and why did an entire era hinge on this alloy iron was not yet reliably smelted on a large scale? Bronze, a mix of copper and tin, was the strategic material of the time used for swords, spears, arrowheads, armor, farming tools, and construction. Without bronze, armies lost their edge, artisans couldn't craft fine goods, and trade stalled. But copper and tin were not evenly distributed. To maintain steady supplies, civilizations built long, complex trade routes through intermediaries. Cyprus was the era's largest copper producer. Tin, far rarer, came from distant regions like Anatolia, the Eastern Mountains, or even Central Europe and the British Isles via hazardous networks. This forced great powers to rely on each other to sustain military and economic strength. No kingdom had all the resources to operate independently. Egyptian pharaohs maintained deft diplomacy with Hittite kings. Mycenaean city-states vied for control of key maritime routes. Cities like Ugarit became vital hubs where merchants from across the ancient world met to exchange goods and information. Yet this interdependence was a double-edged sword. If one link in the chain broke, if tin supplies dwindled, or trade routes were blocked by war or piracy, the entire system risked collapse. Scholars liken this Bronze Age world to an early form of globalization. Like any global economy, it thrived when all parts worked in harmony, but was terrifyingly fragile against unexpected shocks. Few imagined such shocks were brewing, and when they erupted, the Bronze Age order crumbled faster than anyone could have foreseen. The Gathering Storm. Despite the brilliance of ancient kings and the expanse of their trade networks, forces beyond human control began to stir. The first signs of crisis emerged quietly from nature. Modern climate studies using ice cores, tree rings, and lake sediments reveal that from the late 13th to early 12th century BCE, the Mediterranean and Near East endured severe climate instability. Prolonged droughts devastated crops, particularly in agriculture-dependent regions like Canaan, the Levant, and Upper Egypt. Tree ring data from Anatolia show years of stunted growth, indicating persistent water shortages. Lake sediments in the Levant confirm reduced rainfall, coinciding with periods of social unrest noted in ancient texts. In an economy reliant on agricultural output and grain imports via sea routes, kingdoms faced mounting pressure. Food shortages drove up prices, sparking famine in rural areas that supplied soldiers and labor to royal courts. Nature's wrath didn't stop there. Powerful earthquakes evidenced by geological faults and collapsed structures at archaeological sites razed key cities. Ugarit, Hattusa, Mycenae, and others bear marks of seismic destruction just before or during violent attacks. City walls fell not to war, but to the earth's might. Granaries were buried and splendid temples reduced to rubble. In a world where a king's authority rested on protecting his people from nature, such disasters struck a profound psychological blow. Beyond physical evidence, surviving diplomatic letters revealed the era's mood. Clay tablets from Ugarit preserve desperate pleas for aid, reports of food shortages, civil unrest, and waves of migrants fleeing drought-stricken lands. These messages paint a world fracturing from within, a system of interdependence struggling to hold as nature spiraled into chaos. Amid this turmoil, famine, natural disasters, and simmering social tensions, the Sea Peoples emerged. Were they the cause of the collapse, or a symptom of a world already breaking apart? The question remains unanswered. Voices of despair. The clearest picture of a world unraveling lies not in cracked earth, but in trembling words etched on clay, the desperate letters between kings unearthed from Ugarit's ruins. Ugarit, on the northern Levantine coast, modern Syria, was a thriving trade hub, a vital economic crossroads. It was not only wealthy, but administratively advanced, with archives of over 1,000 clay tablets, recording transactions, treaties, and diplomatic correspondence. Among them are letters that chill modern readers. One letter sent by Ugarit's king to Cyprus as enemies neared reads, "The enemy is at our gates. Our city is in peril. Send troops and provisions at once if you can. If not, I fear Ugarit will not hold." These stark, desperate words reflect a world once defined by trade and diplomacy, now fighting for survival. Other letters reveal the trade system's collapse. In a missive to Alashia, Cyprus, Ugarit's king laments that ships cannot dock due to strange pirates off the coast, and copper and tin, once reliably delivered, no longer arrive. These scattered details show a regional economy grinding to a halt. As trade faltered, kingdoms' military and food supplies plummeted into crisis. The letter's tone shifts over time. Earlier tablets bear formal greetings, offers of gift exchanges, and marriage negotiations reflecting a confident, prosperous world. But in Ugarit's final letters, written just before its destruction, confidence vanishes, replaced by panic, pleas for aid, and primal fear. Kings who once saw themselves at the pinnacle of power now wrote fragile pleas like any commoner. Then Ugarit fell. When archaeologists uncovered these tablets, many lay on writing desks unsent. These final undelivered letters stand as vivid testimony to a world disintegrating. In each cuneiform stroke, we sense the breath of an era fading away. A world of splendor. Just years before those desperate pleas were scratched onto clay, Mediterranean cities basked in rare prosperity and confidence. Ugarit was not just a bustling port, but a cultural beacon. In the grand homes of merchants and nobles, fine pottery, gold jewelry, and carved statues adorned every corner, signaling a wealthy elite who spared no expense. Ships crowded the harbor markets, teemed with silk spices, colored glass, and precious metals from across the ancient world. Artisans etched gods and myths onto walls, reflecting a vibrant, self-assured culture. Hattusa, the Hittite capital, was equally grand. Massive temples and city gates, built from huge stone blocks, were adorned with intricate carvings. In palaces, scribes meticulously recorded treaties and events, as if time and history belonged to them. In the West, Mycenaean city-states centered on grand palaces, their walls alive with vivid frescoes of hunts, rituals, and bold sea voyages. Mycenaean warriors in gleaming bronze armor paraded in festivals celebrating strength and tradition. Even commoners, though not rich, benefited from this globalized economy, wearing finer cloth, using better tools, and accessing luxuries once reserved for elites. In religious rites, solemn processions offered the best to the gods, not just for blessings, but to flaunt the city's wealth and power. Above all, people felt a deep faith in their world's stability. Kings proudly carved victories and treaties into stone. Merchants eagerly invested in long voyages. Citizens believed their intricate, radiant world would endure for generations. None imagined that within years it would turn to ash. Fortresses would burn, trade routes sever, and festival joys give way to cries of despair. Reading Ugarit's final letters, or standing amid Mycenae's and Hattusa's ruins today, we see not just broken stone, but a profound sorrow for a world once brimming with faith and vitality, now mere echoes of a lost era. First whispers of the Sea Peoples. Amid this splendor, undercurrents began to shift, not through a great war, but through faint warnings carved in stone. The earliest evidence of the Sea Peoples comes from the Merneptah Stele, or Victory Stele, erected around 1207 BCE in Egypt. Pharaoh Merneptah, son of Rameses II, faced threats from western and eastern borders. Amid boasts of victories over Libyan tribes and Meshwesh, a brief passage opens one of history's greatest mysteries. Canaan has been plundered. Ashkelon is taken. Gezer is seized. Yanoam is no more. Israel is laid waste, its seed is not. And Shurdan, Shekelesh, Ekwesh, Luka, Teresh, those who came from the sea afar, have been defeated, no longer a threat to Egypt. The names Shurdan, Shekelesh, Ekwesh, Luka, and Teresh became key clues in tracing the Sea Peoples. The phrase "from the sea afar" is both specific and enigmatic. No prior Egyptian record mentions these groups. They were not traditional foes. Scholars suggest they may have been migrant groups or warrior coalitions emerging as climate and social unrest escalated. Their mention in an official text like the Merneptah Stele indicates their clashes were significant enough to be immortalized, a sign that the Sea Peoples' presence was no minor affair. The simultaneous reference to Canaan's ravaged cities suggests these seafaring groups impacted the entire Mediterranean, where trade and political alliances were already strained. From these few lines, we sense a new wave of unrest rising, one even mighty pharaohs could not ignore. This was just the beginning. The storm breaks, Rameses III's battle. If the Merneptah Stele was the first warning of the Sea Peoples, less than 3 decades later, Egypt faced the full fury of their storm. Around 1175 BCE, under Pharaoh Rameses III, Egypt fought one of its most decisive battles, vividly depicted in reliefs on the walls of Medinet Habu in Thebes. These 3,000-year-old images remain sharp, showing a massive force arriving from the sea, not just warriors, but entire migrating communities, with women, children, and ox-drawn carts, as if seeking not just plunder but settlement. Rameses III's inscriptions name the Sea Peoples Coalition Peliset, Cheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh, names still debated by scholars seeking their true origins. The reliefs depict a well-equipped sea fleet with large oared ships and wide sails. Their warriors wear horned or peaked helmets, carry round shields, and wield unfamiliar weapons, suggesting not a ragtag band, but a force prepared for large-scale war. Foreseeing the clash, Rameses III set ambushes along the coast and deployed Egyptian warships at Nile branches and river mouths, strategic points the Sea Peoples had to cross to penetrate inland. As battle commenced, the Sea Peoples' ships were trapped in shallow waters, easy targets for Egyptian archers and infantry on both banks. The reliefs show fierce fighting, but also bodies floating in the river ships, wrecked, and migrants captured or slain. Rameses III proclaimed a resounding victory. "Those who came from the sea, I drove them back to the sea. They lie scattered on the sands. None survived to carry word home." Yet behind these triumphant words lies an undeniable truth. This was no minor raid. It was a desperate mass migration, a clash between Egypt and displaced peoples seeking new homes. Though Rameses III claimed victory, Egypt did not escape unscathed. Its Levantine territories, long under Egyptian influence, were lost forever. Egypt's international power waned, and its economy suffered heavily from the war. This was but one piece of a larger puzzle. While Egypt maintained some stability, other kingdoms were less fortunate. The sea's tide swept on, leaving cities in flames and civilizations shattered. The Sea People's identity, the Medinet Habu reliefs, mark a historical turning point where the old world faded and a chaotic new order rose from the ashes. From surviving records like the Merneptah Stele Medinet Habu reliefs and scattered texts, historians have compiled a list of Sea People's names: Sheridan Shekelesh, Peliset, Cheker, Denian, Luka. These evocative names raise unanswered questions. Notably, no texts written by the Sea Peoples themselves have been found. All we know comes from their adversaries, primarily Egypt, a civilization meticulous in recording military encounters. Consider these groups closely. The Sheridan, often depicted as elite warriors, stand out with horned helmets, fine armor, and round shields. Some scholars link them to Sardinia, where ancient cultural traces show similarities, but evidence remains inconclusive. The Shekelesh may connect to Sicily, though this rests on linguistic guesses without clear archaeological support. The Peliset left the clearest historical mark. Many historians agree they were ancestors of the Philistines, who settled Canaan's coast, founding cities like Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod. Archaeological evidence shows a new culture emerging there, heavily influenced by the Aegean, distinct from local Canaanite traditions. The Cheker, another group settling in the Levant, left traces at Dor, but their original homeland is unknown. The Danaan, most debated, may relate to the Danaoi, a Greek term for Mycenaeans, suggesting some sea peoples originated in Greece, though this remains hypothetical. The Luka, often tied to Lycia in Anatolia, a region with a long maritime and piratical tradition, also lack definitive proof. What unites these names is our ignorance of their origins. No ancient map marks a Sheridan kingdom or Danaan territory. No city claims to be the Peliset's homeland before Canaan. No chronicles from these groups exist. This makes the Sea Peoples a uniquely elusive historical phenomenon. Were they independent groups that allied by chance, or an organized coalition with a shared goal of migration and conquest, historians still lack a definitive answer. This ambiguity ensures the Sea People's story retains an aura of unsolved mystery, a forbidden piece of history at the heart of the ancient world. Warriors of the Sea. Perhaps the most striking impression of the Sea Peoples, both for the civilizations they faced and for us today, lies not in their mysterious names, but in their vivid warrior imagery preserved in reliefs, especially at Medinet Habu. Walking past the temple's columns, battle scenes unfold, Egyptian soldiers clash with strange warriors from the sea. These figures differ markedly from Egypt's traditional foes, like the Libyans or Canaanites. Their most distinctive feature is their headgear. Many Sea Peoples' warriors are depicted with helmets bearing two sharp horns or wide-brimmed caps, with raised crests, a style unseen in Egyptian or neighboring military traditions. These helmets, possibly symbolic of strength or cultural identity, have sparked decades of scholarly debate. Were they ceremonial for leaders, or a common warrior trait across Sea Peoples groups? They carried round shields, some convex others, flat often with a central metal boss, to deflect blows or strike in close combat. Such shields were common in the Aegean and Anatolia, but unfamiliar to Egyptians who used oval or rectangular shields. Their weapons included short double-edged swords, large daggers, and throwing spears. Some reliefs show leaf-shaped swords akin to those found at Mycenaean sites, bolstering theories of Aegean ties. Their attire was striking short-fringed kilts, often barefoot, or in light sandals suited for agile movement on ships or swift coastal landings. These elements painted a picture of alien, formidable warriors. To Egyptians, accustomed to familiar enemies' weapons and tactics, the Sea Peoples must have seemed both bizarre and menacing. Their distinctiveness reinforced the sense that they hailed from distant lands bearing unique military traditions not fully integrated with Mediterranean coastal cultures. Archaeologists continue to compare Sea Peoples' warrior imagery with artifacts from Sardinia, Sicily, Lycia, and Mycenaean Greece, but no clear conclusions emerge. Every detail, horned helmets, round shields, strange swords, remains a scattered piece in an incomplete portrait. Reading the Merneptah stelae or gazing at Medinet Habu's reliefs, one thing is clear: the Sea Peoples were no fleeting shadows. They were a force powerful enough to be immortalized in Egyptian stone, and numerous enough to spark one of the Bronze Age's greatest crises. But who were they, raiders or refugees? This question has fueled over a century of debate. Two main theories emerge. Were the Sea Peoples bold pirates or part of an organized migration that plunged the Mediterranean into chaos? The pirate theory draws on early Egyptian accounts describing swift sea-based attacks, ships striking coasts, plundering, then retreating. This tactic fits organized piracy common in the ancient Mediterranean. The Luca, linked to Lycia, a region known for maritime warriors and pirates, seem to support this view. But if they were merely pirates, why do reliefs depict women, children, and migrating groups? Why, in the major assault under Rameses III, did the Sea Peoples bring ox carts, livestock, and tents? Clear signs of migration, not just raiding. This leads to the second theory favored by many modern scholars. The Sea Peoples were an organized migration, born from profound upheavals across the ancient world. Climate crises, prolonged droughts, earthquakes, and collapsing trade networks turned once thriving lands into harsh, unlivable environments. In this context, groups from heavily affected regions like Anatolia, the Aegean, or further west were forced to abandon their homes, bringing entire communities to seek new settlements. When met with resistance from established civilizations, these migrations easily turned violent, becoming wars and raids. This may explain how the Sea Peoples entered history not just as pirates, but as desperate communities fighting for a future. The question remains open. The Sea Peoples may not fit neatly into one category. They could be a mix of groups: pirates, migrants, professional warriors, refugees. This diversity and complexity make them so elusive and compelling to history enthusiasts. To understand their nature, every hypothesis, archaeological clue, and surviving text must be explored, a journey that reveals some parts of history remain reluctant to yield their secrets. The fall of Ugarit, debates about the Sea Peoples' true nature, may persist, but their impact is undeniable. Ugarit stands as the starkest testament to their destructive power. On the northern Levantine coast, modern Syria, Ugarit was a major Bronze Age trade hub. Its ships sailed the Mediterranean trading copper, tin, cedar-colored glass, fine cloth, and other luxuries. Beyond wealth, Ugarit was remarkably advanced. Its alphabet, one of humanity's earliest writing systems, laid the groundwork for Phoenician and modern scripts. The royal palace, vast and intricate, housed hundreds of clay tablets detailing trade treaties and royal correspondence, enriching modern understanding of the region's political and economic landscape before the Sea Peoples struck. But all changed in an instant. Ugarit's final letters reflect growing panic as enemies likely the Sea Peoples closed in. Then Ugarit vanished from history. Modern excavations at Ras Shamra, Ugarit's site, reveal a layer of ash and destruction blanketing the city. Walls collapsed, bricks, charred clay tablets, shattered or melted by intense heat. Strikingly, there's no evidence Ugarit was rebuilt. The once thriving city was abandoned forever after the attack. Archaeologists found unfinished tablets in kilns, suggesting the assault was so sudden that artisans had no time to complete their work. Some diplomatic letters remained on writing desks unsent. These speak to the attack's ferocity and the ruling elite's helplessness against the Sea People's tide. With Ugarit's fall, a key link in the Mediterranean trade network broke, sending the region's interdependent economy reeling. The end of Hattusa. If Ugarit's fall shows the Sea People's devastating power over coastal trade hubs, the story of Hattusa, the Hittite Empire's mighty capital, opens a more enigmatic chapter. Deep in Anatolia's highlands, Hattusa was the heart of a Bronze Age superpower. The Hittite Empire spanned Anatolia to the Levant, rivaling Egypt in treaties and wars. Hattusa sprawled across a vast site, with fortified stone walls, ornate gates, and a grand royal palace. Its archives yielded over 30,000 clay tablets, detailing laws, diplomacy, religion, and warfare. Around 1190 BCE, Hattusa was suddenly abandoned. Excavations revealed destruction and fire across the city. Yet here lies the mystery: no direct evidence ties the Sea Peoples to Hattusa's fall. No Egyptian record mentions such an attack. However, the timing is too coincidental to dismiss. Hattusa's abandonment aligns with the Sea Peoples' sweep through the Mediterranean, as alliances and international trade collapsed. Some scholars suggest that after ravaging coastal centers, the Sea Peoples indirectly destabilized the Hittite Empire, already weakened by climate crises, droughts, and conflicts with mountain tribes. The Hittites' final royal letters, like Ugarit's, carry a desperate tone pleading for aid from vassals and allies. What is certain is that Hattusa was never rebuilt. The Hittite Empire, once Egypt's equal, vanished from history, giving way to a chaotic era of small kingdoms and migrating peoples dominating Anatolia. What truly happened in Hattusa's final days? Did the Sea Peoples directly assault the city? Or did their broader impact through trade collapse and spreading unrest push the empire into an unsalvageable crisis? No one knows for sure, but the timing and evidence of disrupted trade routes suggest the Sea Peoples' shadow loomed over Hattusa's end, directly or indirectly. The Mycenaean collapse. As Hattusa burned, the crisis didn't stop in Anatolia. It swept across the Aegean, striking the Mycenaean civilization, the Bronze Age Greek powerhouse. Known for cities like Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, and Thebes, the Mycenaeans were major trade and military players in the Aegean. Their fortified palaces, massive cyclopean walls, and rich royal tombs reflect a prosperous, sophisticated society. Mycenaean governance revolved around palace complexes, where kings' wannaks controlled economies, militaries, religious rites, and diplomacy. Their trade routes stretched across the Mediterranean, linking Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. From the late 13th to early 12th century BCE, Mycenaean cities fell one by one. At Mycenae, excavations reveal thick ash layers covering ruined structures, signs of a citywide fire. Granaries, armories, and homes were destroyed simultaneously. Pylos, a key administrative hub, met a similar fate. At the Palace of Nestor, clay tablets hardened in the blaze survive today. One final tablet records orders to muster troops and prepare warships, suggesting an attack came too swiftly as the city organized defenses. At Tiryns, a mighty fortress walls collapsed and buildings burned. The entire palace system, the backbone of Mycenaean power, crumbled within decades. Notably, no long-term rebuilding occurred at these sites. The Mycenaean civilization, reliant on complex palace networks, could not recover. Some scholars attribute this destruction to internal unrest or rebellion. But comparing the timing with the Sea People's campaigns in the Levant and Egypt, and noting Mycenaean records of naval defenses, many believe the Sea Peoples played a significant role, directly or indirectly. After this devastation, the Mycenaean world sank into deep decline. Their linear B script vanished. International trade collapsed. City-states fragmented into isolated communities. From this void, Greece's Dark Age began, lasting centuries until the Greek world re-emerged in the Archaic and Classical eras. Standing amid Mycenae's or Pylos's charred ruins today, it's hard not to shudder. A civilization that once dominated the Aegean and rivaled continental powers fell in flames, taking its palace system with it. Though the Sea Peoples aren't always named in Greek texts, their shadow lingers, a relentless tide sweeping all in its path. The Philistine legacy in Canaan. While the Mycenaeans faded in the Aegean, in Canaan, the sea, peoples left a lasting mark beyond destruction. Profound demographic and cultural shifts, visible even today. Canaan, stretching from the southern Levantine coast to Byblos, was a prosperous land. Cities like Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gaza, and Gezer were vibrant trade hubs. The Canaanites built a rich culture, trading widely with Egypt, Hittites, and Mycenaeans, serving as intermediaries on major Mediterranean sea routes. By the late 13th century, BCE archaeological evidence reveals a powerful wave of change sweeping the region. Most prominent among the Sea Peoples settling here were the Peliset, widely accepted as the ancestors of the Philistines. Medinet Habu reliefs depict the Peliset as a major force in the attack on Egypt. Unlike some groups, the Peliset were not wholly defeated. After their loss in Egypt, some settled along Canaan's coast. Excavations at sites like Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gaza show a new settlement layer emerging around 1200 BCE, aligning with the Sea Peoples' migrations. Notably, this layer's material culture differs sharply from local Canaanite traditions. Pottery reflects late Mycenaean or Aegean styles architecture, burial customs, and even dietary habits point to a new seafaring population. From this group, the Philistines emerged, becoming key rivals to the Israelite tribes as recorded in the Hebrew Bible. The Peliset's settlement in Canaan reshaped the region's power balance and demographic map. Canaanites didn't vanish, but in many coastal areas they were displaced or assimilated by the newcomers. Archaeological evidence shows the Philistines quickly built a robust economy, reviving trade networks and developing a distinct cultural identity, blending maritime origins with local influences. This reveals a crucial aspect of the Sea Peoples' migrations. They were not just destroyers, but builders. Some groups settled, adapted, and shaped the cultural fabric of their new lands, leaving a legacy spanning millennia. Collapse of the Bronze Age network. Perhaps the deepest consequence of the Sea Peoples' wave of destruction was not the burned cities, but the collapse of the network that once bound the ancient world. Nearly 2 centuries earlier, Mediterranean civilizations had forged an embryonic global economy with maritime and overland trade routes, linking Egypt, Hittites, Mycenaeans, Ugarit, Canaan, Cyprus, Anatolia, and beyond. Copper and tin, the Bronze Age's lifeblood, flowed through this system alongside cedar gold, silver, ivory, gems, fine cloth, wine oil, and countless rare goods. Merchant ships glided across the Mediterranean like shuttles, weaving a vast economic tapestry, sustaining the complex palace economies of Egypt. Hittites, and Mycenaeans. Within decades, this network shattered beyond repair. Coastal trade routes were blockaded or severed by sea peoples' fleets. Thriving ports like Ugarit turned to rubble. Byblos declined. Alatia, modern Cyprus, a key copper supplier, was attacked and plunged into chaos. As merchant fleets vanished, the flow of copper and tin, vital for weapons and tools, halted. This triggered a domino effect. Without bronze, palace economies collapsed, unable to sustain military might or elite structures. Tablets from Ugarit and Pylos show officials, even as destruction loomed, scrambling to organize shipments, request aid, and muster navies, all in vain. Trade routes had grown too unstable. The ancient world swiftly descended from order to chaos. International alliances dissolved. Diplomatic treaties, once carved in stone as eternal promises, became meaningless as partners ceased to exist or lost the power to fulfill obligations. Palace-based economies reliant on steady imports could not survive without trade. Palaces fell, elites lost authority, artisans went jobless, and populations reverted to subsistence living. Trade roads fell silent. Warehouses stood empty. Harbors, once alive with merchants' voices, held only crumbled walls and weathered mooring posts. This is why many historians describe this collapse as one of the earliest failures of globalization. A deeply connected world, seemingly stable, proved astonishingly fragile against sudden disruptions. As the dust settled, the Mediterranean world as it once was gone. A new order, fragmented, localized, uncertain, arose, ushering in a dark age lasting centuries before humanity recovered. Origins: the Mycenaean theory. As the Mediterranean descended into chaos, the question of the Sea People's true origins grows urgent for modern scholars. One prominent theory posits that some Mycenaeans, after their civilization's collapse, joined the Sea Peoples, migrating and raiding across the Mediterranean. This theory rests on compelling observations. From 1200–1150 BCE, Mycenaean palace cities were systematically destroyed. Power structures crumbled, elites lost their base, and communities were cut off from imported food and goods. In this environment, many Mycenaeans were forced to flee their former centers to survive. Archaeological evidence shows a sharp population drop in the Peloponnese after the palace collapses. Coastal areas and Aegean islands, once bustling, were abandoned. Simultaneously, new settlements in places like the Levantine coast show Aegean cultural traits, particularly in pottery architecture and burial customs. The name Danaean, listed among the Sea Peoples, may link to the Danaoi, a later Greek term for Mycenaeans, suggesting some Sea Peoples hailed from Greece. Scholars propose that displaced Mycenaeans, rather than facing death, joined other Sea Peoples groups, forming armed migrant bands fighting for new lands. However, this theory faces challenges. No direct evidence shows Sea Peoples attacking Egypt spoke Greek or bore distinct Mycenaean symbols. The Sea Peoples' cultural diversity, horned helmets of Sheridan, round shields of Peliset, varied weapons, suggests that if Mycenaeans participated, they were only part of a broader coalition, not its core. Some Mycenaean communities survived the crisis, particularly in rural areas and islands, suggesting not all warriors joined the Sea Peoples. Finally, equating the Sea Peoples with Mycenaeans risks oversimplifying a clearly complex phenomenon. Evidence points to Sea Peoples groups from Anatolia, the Balkans, the Aegean, and the Levant. The idea that displaced Mycenaeans contributed to the Sea Peoples is well supported, but incomplete. The Balkan migration theory. Another major theory suggests that some Sea Peoples were linked to migrations from the Balkans, particularly the Dorian tribes moving south during the crisis. This theory draws on archaeological and genetic evidence. Around the late 13th to early 12th century, BCE migrations from the northern Balkans intensified. Archaeological sites in the Danube Valley and Balkans show significant upheaval, possibly from drought, population pressure, or internal conflict. Amid this, groups moved south through Macedonia and Thessaly, into Greece, including those later called Dorians. The Dorians' arrival in southern Greece aligns with the Mycenaean collapse, prompting questions. Did some Dorians or other Balkan groups join the Sea Peoples, fueling armed sea migrations? Archaeological clues are suggestive. Post-collapse settlements in the Peloponnese show abrupt changes in architecture, burials, and pottery distinct from prior Mycenaean traditions. Similar patterns appear on the Levantine coast. Recent ancient DNA studies from Greece, the Balkans, and the Levant show increased Balkan genetic markers in southern Greece and Cyprus after the collapse, hinting that Balkan migrants not only reached Greece, but may have joined sea migrations. However, this theory has limits. Later, Greek accounts suggest Dorians established power in southern Greece, post-collapse, not vanished into the sea. If many Dorians became sea peoples, their cultural footprint in Greece might be weaker. The sea peoples' diversity suggests no single group dominated. While DNA evidence is promising, current samples are too limited for firm conclusions about Balkan migrants' role in the sea peoples. The Balkan theory adds a vital dimension, underscoring that the sea peoples were not a linear event, but a complex interplay of migrations. Their multifaceted nature keeps their story enigmatic. A coalition of crisis. After weighing theories from Mycenaeans to Balkan migrants, many scholars conclude the Sea Peoples were not a unified nation or fixed alliance. They were likely a temporary coalition of diverse groups, each with distinct motives caught in the era's upheaval. This view is bolstered by evidence. Egyptian records list varied groups: Sherdun, Shekelesh, Peliset, Jeker, Denyen, Luka, with no clear homeland. Their military traditions, attire, and weapons differ widely, raising doubts about a single nation. The likely answer is a loose confederation formed amid widespread collapse. As climate crises, droughts, earthquakes, and trade breakdowns ravaged societies, empires lost control over peripheries. Displaced farmers, jobless soldiers, pirates, and desperate migrants likely banded together, forming mobile populations crossing the Mediterranean. Stronger or sea-skilled groups took leadership, while others joined for land wealth or survival. This explains why in major campaigns like Rameses III's battle, the Sea Peoples included women, children, livestock, and carts, not just raiders, but armed migrants seeking settlement. Archaeological evidence in the Levant shows diverse cultural traces. Some sites reflect strong Aegean influence, others Anatolian, and some blend local traditions. This supports the idea of a non-uniform coalition born from varied peoples converging in chaos. This theory reflects the era's true instability. As the old order collapsed and palaces failed to protect people, populations moved. In such turmoil, military might became key to survival. From disparate groups, a loose Sea Peoples coalition emerged, part fighters, part refugees, seeking a place to endure. This coalition may have dissolved upon reaching new lands or evolved, explaining their scattered historical traces. This view, seeing the Sea Peoples as a hybrid alliance, offers the most plausible explanation, capturing why their mystery resists a single answer. Climate as catalyst. Among theories on the Sea Peoples' rise, the climate crisis hypothesis is perhaps the most compelling, illuminating not just the Sea Peoples, but a world cracking at its core. Modern climate studies using ice cores, tree rings, lake sediments, and pollen show that from the late 13th through the 12th century BCE, the Mediterranean and Near East faced a severe prolonged drought, possibly lasting 50 to 150 years. These droughts slashed wheat and barley yields in the Levant, Anatolia, and regions like the Aegean and Balkans, where hilly terrain and limited arable land worsened food shortages. In this context, societies reliant on trade and centralized palace economies destabilized. Food scarcity spiked prices, fueling public unrest and pushing lower classes into desperation. With few options, many groups abandoned their homes, joining mass migrations. Moving through a world where old political orders had collapsed and fertile lands were held by coastal cities or river valleys, conflict was inevitable. In such instability, lone migrant groups were vulnerable, so many allied forming armed coalitions to protect members and seize resources. From desperate farmers, jobless soldiers, and displaced nomads, the Sea Peoples coalitions took shape. In this view, the Sea Peoples were not the collapse's root cause, but a direct outcome of deepening climate and social crises. Their presence accelerated the ongoing collapse. Destroyed cities, severed trade routes, and displaced farmers fueled a spiral of violence and migration. Archaeological evidence strongly supports this. Destruction layers at Ugarit, Mycenae, and Pylos align with prolonged droughts. In the Levant, new populations appear in archaeological records as palace systems and trade networks fail. Many scholars believe the interplay of climate crisis and violent migration was the strongest driver behind the Sea Peoples phenomenon. The elusive homeland. The deeper we delve into the Sea Peoples story, the more we face the greatest wall of uncertainty. We don't truly know where they came from. Across thousands of clay tablets, countless reliefs and records from ancient civilizations, no line clearly names their homeland. No nation is identified. No king claims to rule Sheridan or Peliset. No map marks their territory. Why? Part of the answer lies in the nature of surviving historical sources, mostly from Egypt, the rare civilization to weather the Sea Peoples' storm. Egyptian record-keeping was distinct. Every inscription, stele, and relief glorified the pharaoh's victories, reinforcing an image of eternal power. Enemies were depicted as barbaric, stateless, and illegitimate, a chaotic wave crashing against the pharaoh's order. The Sea Peoples listing in Egyptian texts reflects this group names, paired with vague phrases like "from the sea" or "from foreign lands" with no clear geographic reference. This may reflect Egypt's genuine ignorance of their origins, but could also be deliberate propaganda obscuring enemies' identities to magnify Pharaoh's might. Moreover, the Sea Peoples were not centralized empires with advanced bureaucracies. They were loose coalitions of diverse groups, many migrants, climate refugees, or displaced communities. By their nature, they left no writing systems, historical temples, or royal chronicles. All we have comes from their adversaries. As historians know, history is written by victors. Thus, nearly everything we know about the Sea Peoples comes through Egypt's biased lens, crafted for political purposes, and sometimes exaggerating Pharaoh's feats. Additionally, regions the Sea Peoples may have come from Anatolia's coast. The Aegean Western Islands were also ravaged in the Bronze Age collapse. Many cities burned and were not rebuilt. Old writing traditions vanished. Direct historical sources from the Sea Peoples' homelands simply don't exist. This blend of Egyptian bias and the absence of Sea Peoples' own records leaves a nearly impenetrable gap in our understanding. Though they shook the Mediterranean world, the Sea Peoples remain ghosts in human memory, a strange tide from the past whose echoes linger but whose true form may never fully emerge. The Philistine transformation. While the Sea Peoples' origins remain unsolved, their journey post-collapse left clearer historical traces. A striking example is the rise of the Philistines linked by archaeological evidence to the Peliset, a key Sea Peoples group. As seen in Medinet Habu reliefs, the Peliset were central to the attack on Egypt. After their defeat by Ramesses III, some Peliset didn't return to the sea, but settled along Canaan's coast. Here, through adaptation and integration, a distinct Philistine culture formed, shaping the Levant's political and cultural landscape for centuries. Excavations at cities like Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath provide clear evidence of this shift. At Ashkelon, archaeological layers show a new settlement horizon around 1200 BCE, aligning with the Sea People's arrival. Notably, large quantities of pottery resembling late Mycenaean styles, rare in Canaan, before this period suggest newcomers brought maritime cultural traditions. At Gaza, architecture and burial customs indicate a community with practices distinct from local Canaanites. Initially, the Philistines retained many Aegean cultural elements in artifacts, architecture, and daily rituals. Over time, they integrated into their new environment, creating a unique hybrid culture, blending maritime roots with local traditions. This evolution is evident at sites like Ashkelon and Ekron, where later Philistine pottery developed distinct styles, no longer mere copies of Mycenaean forms. Genetically modern ancient DNA analysis shows early Philistines carried markers consistent with Western Mediterranean origins, reinforcing the theory that some sea peoples, specifically the Peliset, were foundational to this community. From a violent migrant wave, the Sea Peoples, or at least some groups, transformed into stable communities, leaving a lasting historical mark. The Philistines became a significant force in the Levant, often clashing with Israelite tribes, as noted in the Hebrew Bible, and contributed to the region's complex political and cultural tapestry. While most Sea Peoples groups dissolved or were assimilated, the Philistine story shows they were not just destroyers, but creators. A vivid example of how deep crises can forge new orders from the ruins of the old. Philistine culture and Mycenaean roots. Did Philistine material culture truly bear Mycenaean hallmarks? Modern archaeological digs offer a compelling answer: yes, in both striking and subtle ways. The strongest evidence comes from pottery. At early Philistine settlements in Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gaza, archaeologists found abundant pottery in the late Mycenaean style, particularly Mycenaean Thrace, with complex geometric patterns, spirals, and wavy lines in red or black on a light background, a hallmark of Mycenaean art at the Bronze Age's twilight. Crucially, this pottery was not imported from Greece, but locally made, indicating artisans with Mycenaean traditions migrated and produced in their new land, pointing to a true movement of people, not just trade or artistic influence. Architecture offers further clues. At Ekron, buildings with open porticos resemble late Mycenaean residential structures. Kilns and workshops there used techniques akin to Aegean craft centers. Burial customs add evidence. Early Philistine cemeteries feature simple pit graves, sometimes with Aegean-style grave goods, contrasting with Canaanite collective tombs or rock-cut chambers. Together, this evidence paints a vivid picture. Early Philistine culture, circa 1200–1150 BCE, bore strong Mycenaean imprints in pottery architecture and rituals. But the story grows richer as within 2 or 3 generations, Philistine material culture evolved significantly. Mycenaean Thrace pottery gave way to unique Philistine styles, with new shapes and motifs reflecting blended influences and local innovation. Architecture began incorporating Levantine features, and burial customs shifted toward regional norms. This evolution shows the Philistines didn't passively carry Mycenaean culture, but actively adapted, blended, and reshaped their identity in their new home, creating a hybrid tradition that honored their roots while embracing Canaan's